I want to kind of open up with this verse. Maybe we could say this together. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14. I'll put it up on the screen. We can say this together. Read this out loud with me. Say, you are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. You are the light of the world. It's one of those things where when Jesus says this, I think it's, I kind of picture that him and Peter would always be the one who argues with Jesus, I'm sure. That those two would get in an argument where Jesus would say, you're the light of the world, and Peter would say, no, Jesus, you're the light of the world, right? Because Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. And then he's telling his followers, you're the light of the world, and Peter would be like, no, you're the light of the world. And Jesus is like, no, you're the light of the world. Peter's like, no, you're the light of the world. And Jesus would be like, yeah, you're right. So when Jesus says, you're the light of the world, this is actually a really big deal, because he's claiming to be the light of the world, and he's saying, you are. As my followers, you're the light of the world. Now, the shocking part of this verse, really to me, is that he says, you're like a city. He's speaking to the church. He's saying, you're the light of the world. Jesus came to the earth claiming to be the light of the world, and yet he says, the church, my followers, you are the light of the world, and you are like a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. And think about the implications of a city. That basically that the church, the church, welcome to Move City Church, by the way. We use the word church because it's something that we use in our culture to talk about a gathering of worship. But the word church just means called out. People who are called out of the world. This world is not your home, but the church is called out of this world to be a city. Like almost a different city on top of a city, like a completely different government on top of the government, right? It's like, that's what's so weird about the word city, that you're called as the church to be an alternative city to this city. Something where it gathers everybody that looks a lot like the city. It's going to be diverse. It's going to come from all different kinds of backgrounds and socioeconomic stature and places. And it's going to affect every single aspect of a city. But it's like this alternative spiritual city. How cool is that? You're the light of the world and you're a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. Our series, we're talking about home. And so from this verse, we can see that there's something else going on here. We know that we're not part of this world, that we're just kind of here temporarily, but there's something that God's doing through the church where we can kind of feel like we belong to something. You're a city. Or like I'm talking about being part of a home. I feel like this could be a church family for you. Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And the church is like a home of homes. It's the home, a spiritual home made up of a bunch of different homes, right? And this one stands above. It's like a city. It's a city on top of a city, okay? So when we go to the home series, we're talking about home. As we're called out of this world into a church. Notice I didn't say the church, because the church is, whenever I say the church, I'm talking about universal over the whole world. You realize most of the population of the church is not in the United States. When they talk about the Christian church, most of those people are in China or India or in other places of the world. And what's wild about the church, started by Jesus, who planted the church, and those first 12 little followers who made such a big impact, and that we're standing here today talking about this guy Jesus because of all that they've done and all that they sacrificed. What's crazy about that is it started in the Middle East with a bunch of people who would today look like terrorists to us. Right? It started in the Middle East and it spread out to the whole world, and really it's the only religion, if you can call it a religion. It's the only religion that its headquarters isn't in the place where it started. Almost every religion has like a headquarters. You have a place where it was birthed, and it kind of still stays there. Christianity is weird because it was birthed in a place where it's the most persecuted on the planet right now. And most people can't even be Christians where it was birthed. And the entire world worships this morning, all over the place in different places, because Jesus is way beyond the way that we set up government and our languages and all that stuff. The church is just, it kind of goes past all of that stuff. Right? We're called out of the world and into a church. It's not just the church, but a local church. This would be a church today. Welcome to a church. This is just one of many. And this is not this does not contain the church, the whole church, right? And that's where we get off track. Some churches want to say, we're the only church. We're the only ones who got it all right, and everybody else is messed up. I'm just saying, we're a church. And so we're going to study about what it means to be part of a church. What does it look like to be in a church? And what we're doing today is actually pretty rare. What you're experiencing right now is becoming more and more rare, where we're going to gather together in person. It's like I see you guys. It's not online. I am not a hologram. You know, it's like we're not watching online. We're just experiencing each other in person. You just look around the room like this is really special. It's really rare. Yeah, touch somebody. Touch your neighbor and say, this is rare. This is special, right? Something's different happening here. This is a community that's going to gather together as people. And speaking of technology or whatever, we also provide notes as you can follow along. So if you'd like to follow along on your device, I keep forgetting to tell you guys that we're on the Bible app. If you don't know what the Bible app is, search Bible in your app store and download the Bible app. And in there, you can actually follow along with all the notes that I'm going to talk about. You can go back later. It'll be there this whole week if you want to look at it, kind of see these scriptures, so that you can be present here, kind of just be with me, walk through this. Because, like I talked about before, we're celebrating the last 10 years of the church, but I am so much more interested in what the next 10 years look like for us. Here's what I think the next 10 years look like for this church. As we get bigger, we have to get smaller. So hear me out with that. As we get bigger. Notice I'm choosing my words really carefully. I say as we get bigger. In other words, we're not causing ourselves to get bigger, but just as we grow, as we get bigger, we have to get smaller. What do I mean by smaller? Anybody think they know what I'm talking about when I say get smaller? Jose's got it.
Ourselves, we have to be smaller and let Jesus grow.
Yeah, focus. Right? More intimate. There's got to be. See, as we get bigger, right? Because numerically, the kingdom is way beyond these walls, right? The church is way beyond this. What do you think?
You get bigger and larger.
Humble. Thank you. That's good. Man, that was way beyond what I was thinking. That's great. Focus, humility, intimacy. See, what we want to do is, as the church is getting larger, we want to intentionally get smaller. And one of the ways that we do that is by putting ourselves into smaller groups. In this group right here, I cannot hear from everybody. There's some of you who didn't raise your hand and you have an idea of what I mean by smaller. But some of you, imagine if I went around the room and said, what do you think? What do you think? Some of you would be like, oh my gosh. This is going to take forever, right? You cannot have intimacy. You can't really focus or really exercise the kind of humility that we need as a church unless we can think smaller, in smaller groups. Today, my hope is that today you would decide to join a small group of our church. We're launching a small group ministry. There should be a program. You should have gotten a program when you came in. And if you have one, I want you to take it out right now. I want you to look at it. Okay? And if you don't have one, you need to go get one. How about that? Make sure everybody has a program. You should see something kind of like this, where you have the small groups listed by men, women, co-ed. And then, what's that? We're all getting programs. That's good. That's okay. Don't worry. We haven't offended too many people yet. Yeah, it's like, oh. It's too big for me. I'm out of here. Yeah, exactly. They're like, oh, he wants to get smaller. We're out of here. What I'm saying is, even a small group. This is the large group gathering. Oh yeah, Jose's got some programs. Raise your hand if you need one of these. There's 2 left. This doesn't obligate you to anything. In there, you should have 2 things. You should be able to open that thing up and see inside of there the list of the small groups that are available. And there's a communication card in there also. What I want you to do is think about filling out this communication card. I want everybody to fill out this communication card this morning. It lets us know that you're here, is aware of communicating with you. Also, if you're new to the church and stuff like that, this doesn't mean that we're going to call you, follow up with you. It's kind of safe. Don't worry about that. This isn't intrusive. But also on the back of that card, there's a place for prayer requests. I love it when you guys write stuff that you want prayer for in your life. And you can sign up for different sorting teams that we have. But one of the places is that you can put in what number small group you want to be a part of. And I will say this, we're going to be talking about small groups for the next 4 weeks. And after that time, we'll launch small groups. During that 4 weeks, we'll be closing down some of those small groups because they've reached their maximum sign-up capacity. So get in there quick, is what I'm saying. Right? So don't wait. Sign up for a small group. This is how we're going to do this. You can also look online. There's going to be lots of places you can do this. Think about, this is what I want you to do. Think through a couple things with me. Does this fit my schedule? You'll notice that the small group stuff's really simple. Basically just, are you a man, woman? Those will just be specifically for men, specifically for women, or co-ed. A lot of them are noted there, whether you can have kids and stuff like that. And then look at the days. We've got a small group on every day, almost every evening, and a lot of just different offerings. This may not be enough to match everybody in the church, so get in quick. That's what I'm trying to say. Sign up. I want you to be a part of this. Pick one of these that you think fits your schedule. Look at your schedule and say, what could I do this day and this time? Okay? Look at that. You're going to take this home with you if you can't figure it out right now. Or ask yourself, would I be willing to reschedule myself or plan around this time and date? Okay? And then you can email groups at movecity.church. Tell us what number you want to sign up for. Is that great?
Yes.
That's simple. That's how you connect. That's how you connect here. I want to talk about why we connect. And I want to talk about my Legos here. I did not spend time to build this, but my kids did. They love building on Legos. I was like, I have a project for you guys. Here's the Lego building. What's cool is that Legos, like they can fit in all different kind of places, but a lot of times if you buy a Lego set, it's built, you can put it together and build a certain thing. So what would this be? This is like a little house, right? Now, this is just a bunch of Legos.
Cleaning that up.
It's for all the kids to play with. I know they all want to when they come back in here. So, what is the difference between this and this? Because here's what I'll tell you, this is just Lego. This is also just Legos. A lot of the same pieces that go to this set. What's the difference between this and that? Yeah, this is wild because look at it. This is just a mess. This is just a mess. Like they're all by themselves. You are excited about this later, right? You want to help me clean this up later? Yeah, he does. Okay. Think about this. Just take a couple of these pieces here. And think about how these pieces could belong together, right? Separately, it's just a mess. And I know this is making some of you really, really nervous right now. I love messes, so I'm just like, I know my wife would be right now like, freaking out. These pieces, they belong together. They can fit together to make something more than just one piece by itself, right? They make something more than they would be by them apart from this thing, okay? So Legos get joined together to make something more. Legos are just pieces of toy. They're just like these pieces, but they can be joined together to make something more. Right? That's just case number one. Think about how you might be like a Lego. You might just be a piece of Lego. And you may be made for something more. And what's going to happen is you're going to have to connect yourself to some other pieces to be put together to make something. Okay? Now I want you to open up the Bible with me. We're going to open up to John chapter 1, verse 1. John 1, 1 through 5, which is kind of a complicated scripture to use. I'll talk about something as simple as Legos and connecting. It's going to seem kind of deep, but this is kind of a launching point that I want us to look at. So you've got Legos. These are just pieces that get joined together for something more, and I want you to think about the nature of God for a second. Okay? So we're going to go all the way back. We're going to kind of just step back from the whole picture of stuff and just kind of picture what is God like. John, that's how he starts out his gospel, which is the story of Jesus' life, which is the Gospels. John's gospel starts out really big, high-level stuff. He talks a lot about spiritual stuff, and it's just kind of over your head a lot of the time. It's beautiful and poetic, but a lot of times this isn't a really good place to start. If you're new in your faith, you want to go somewhere like Mark, which is really short, simple. John's really big. Let me show you. We're going to read John chapter 1, verse 1 through 5, and you'll see why I'm saying that. John says, in the beginning, the Word already existed. That's already confusing. Right? Usually the Gospels start out like Jesus was born, or something, or John the Baptist. John is writing a Gospel, he's starting out way back. He's like, in the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. In the beginning. Now, when you read something like this, you come across this. This is the New Testament, and you've got the New Testament, the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the ancient Hebrew Scriptures. It goes all the way back to Moses. And it's the beginning of the entire Bible. So the Bible is made up of the Old and New Testaments, a bunch of different books, 66 different books. The very first book of the Bible you should be thinking about when you read this phrase. Okay, John's in the kind of later part of the Bible, and he says, in the beginning. And what are you thinking about? At the very beginning. We're thinking Genesis 1:1, because the Bible starts out with the phrase, in the beginning. So he's using that phrase on purpose. He's saying, let's go back. In the beginning. So, we got to go back to Genesis 1 for a second. Would you follow me there? Maybe it's a little bit harder to find, but this is on page 1 of your Bible. Actually, I don't know what page it is. It's on page 5 of my Bible, so I'm like, I don't know what the rest is at the beginning. There's a lot of little notes in the beginning. Genesis 1. We're talking about at the very beginning of the Bible. This is kind of the entrance, the poetic entrance to the nature of God. And it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. Evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day. If you jump ahead to a couple verses, to verse 26, it says, God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the livestock and the wild animals on the earth and the small animals that scurry on the ground. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, govern it, reign over it. Okay? Now, if you're just looking at that beginning story, okay, so think back to we were reading in John, and we're beginning the story about Jesus, and John starts out saying, in the beginning. You've got to have some context. You've got to know what he's talking about when he says in the beginning. You've got to go back to Genesis chapter 1 and look at the beginning. And what happens at the beginning? God's creating the whole world. However he does that, Don't you want to know a lot more about the beginnings of the world? It's kind of funny. The Bible just says this, kind of sort of poetically, like, he just created it. God. And then he says, then you have this interesting phrase where God is like speaking, and God says, let us make human beings to be like us. Is that confusing for anybody else? Have you ever read that before? This is how the Bible starts. So right from the beginning, you're like, that's kind of complicated. And if you look back at the very couple of verses, it says the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. You've got this interesting picture of God right from the beginning, where he's like, let us. Well, who are you talking to? Who is us? And then he makes them. He creates people to be in community. Why? Because God exists as an us. God, the nature of God is a community. He himself is in relationship, right? So when you think in the beginning, you think Genesis. Go back to Genesis, and we're talking about a God who is creating the world. And that God did not create us because he was lonely. He was already in relationship. He created us out of joy. There's a quote that I know of an ancient, like a German theologian who said that we were created out of the laughter of the Trinity. That God was not desperate for someone to hang out with. He already had fellowship, and out of that fellowship and that relationship and that connectedness just overflowed into creation. That's what the Bible says. That's kind of the story that you've got to understand. God is celebrating community when he creates everything. Going back to John chapter 1, he says, in the beginning, the Word. In the beginning was the Word. Word up. The Word. You gotta realize, like, it's a capital W, so it means something. It comes from the word logos, which really just means logic or reasoning. And it's kind of like the reasoning of God. It's kind of a metaphor. We find out that it's also a he. And if you continue to read on in John chapter 1, it says the Word became human. We'll talk about that in the coming weeks. But you find out that logos, this word, represents Jesus. That he's starting out his story about Jesus way before Jesus' birth, way before anybody else's birth. He's talking about Jesus was there in the beginning. And he wasn't just standing next to God. He wasn't just with God. He was God. There's something there, right? How is it that God can be with God and was God? Confusing? Yeah. Somehow, yeah, what?
That's God.
That's God. He's God, right? He's confusing. But we know one thing from Scripture. Somehow, through all this, God has revealed himself to us as a Trinity. That's not a biblical word necessarily, but it definitely is an expression of what you see in Scripture. God has revealed himself to the world as a community. He's already got all the relationship that he needs. He's 3 in 1. He's revealed himself. And so Jesus is both with God and was God. Somehow in there, you've got this God who's already community, right? God didn't make us out of loneliness, but out of fellowship, out of a deep fellowship. Now that's kind of complicated, I get that. But you got to understand the nature of God is already belonging and connection. And then he creates us. It's totally natural that we want belonging and connection and community. That we want to be part of something, be put together to build something that's way beyond us. That's put in you. That's the nature of God. And then he's created us with that same nature, to be in community. Now, it's not good for people to be isolated. The Bible even, actually in Genesis chapter 2, it kind of breaks down chapter 1 into some details, because you want to know more about how did that creation of them work. And he talks about how he formed this man, this dirty man out of dust, right? Dusty guy. Takes dust together, breathes life into it, and he makes a human. And that's the story. You're like, okay, that's weird. Got this mud thing and makes a human out of it, and that's man. Breathes life into it. And at that point, you're thinking, everything has been good and good and good, and like, oh man, the creation is awesome, it's good. And he gets to this point, and this is where the Bible, one of the very first things that's not good. If you look in Genesis chapter 2, 18, what does it say? It's not good. It's not good for man to be alone. Now, you can take that real literally right now and be like, yeah, man, they can't be alone. They can't handle it. But women isn't written there, but women, we can be alone, right? This is where you feel like, women can kind of do their own thing, but men, do not leave them alone. They can't do it. And I can't disagree with that, okay? I don't think that's necessarily the gist of the scripture here, but, you got Adam. He's by himself. And God says, this is not good. It's not good for man to be alone. Why did God want us to see that? Because isolation happens inevitably sometimes, and we have to realize that it's not from God. It's not good. Call it what it is. It's not good to be alone. So he makes a helper. We need help. Okay? Think about this for a second. When you want to punish somebody really bad, the worst of the worst criminals, what do they do with them? It's called solitary confinement. That's the worst thing you can do to a human being. Lock them in a room by themselves and isolate them completely by themselves. You ever thought about that? Isolation, sometimes it's fun to get alone. I'm with you. Anybody else in here love some time alone sometimes? And maybe some of you are like, please, I wish I had. Just 5 minutes, please, Pastor. People. Let's give me some time alone. And God talks about that too. That time alone, it recharges your batteries, your energy, but you get recharged so that you can make a difference in the world and you can be with other people, right? You're still created for that. So when you're alone, maybe for those first 5 minutes, the 30 minutes, you're watching TV by yourself, whatever, you're alone. You love it. But year after year, you would deteriorate. You would literally go insane and possibly die from isolation. It's one of the worst things that can happen to you, being isolated. Hebrews 10:24 says, don't give up meeting together. Don't give it up. And there's this kind of this pull, this draw to sometimes, because people are people and they offend us, we offend each other. It's kind of a racist. That puts people together. He puts a man and a woman together. Right there, you already have the biggest war on the planet happening. You're like, God, whoa. You know? He's created us in a way that we don't always mesh real well, and so we try to run from each other. And that's why the Bible says, don't give up being together. Continue to do this. Now, this is rare that we do this. Don't give up doing this. Don't give up being together in intimate groups where you can kind of focus. Don't give up on that. I've also heard of that bear attacks. You ever heard of people getting attacked by bears? Heard of that? Well, no, I just recently heard it. I was talking to, I don't even know why I was talking to somebody, but we were talking about a bear sighting that was on post. And the whatever they call him, I don't know why, I don't know right now, but the person who is over the nature stuff. Park ranger. Every once in a while. I'm thinking about bear, okay? It's getting my heart rate going up. 'Cause they're real and they all attack you. And what he told me was, bears do not attack you in groups. Bears will not attack a group. Every single bear attack has been on when you're alone. Bears only attack a person while they're alone. Think about how powerful that is. I was like, I like that. I'm going to write that down. But I forgot what a park ranger is. You know, think about that. There's a danger in being alone. There's a real danger in it. James chapter 5, verse 16 talks about how when you pray for each other, there's healing in that. Nowhere in the Bible does it say you can get healing any other way. You have to come together. There's some healing that happens when we care for each other, when we pray for each other, okay? You know I'm just trying to make an argument for you to be part of a small group, right?
You're good.
Yeah, okay. This is a really important thing because it's really dangerous for you not to. It's really dangerous to go this alone. There's so many other commands in the Bible that say one another, pray for one another, love one another, serve one another. You cannot obey the commands of the Bible without being together, without other people. You're made for this. Now, we live in a culture that's completely disconnected. Realize that you live in a society and a culture that's designed to disconnect you. Right now, statistically speaking, you've been listening long enough that you've already tuned me out at least 12 times. That's okay. I mean, because our culture is like that. I'm not upset about that. But realize that sometimes it's really hard for us to be present. Really hard here. This is what I'm saying to you is that it's getting worse. It's getting worse and worse, and it's getting harder and harder to connect with people and actually have real relationships. Do you hear me, church? I'm not making this up. Is it true? Do you feel like it seems like it's getting harder? There's always things have been barriers to relationships. There's always been things there. But the layers are so deep now. So much to have to get through to get to the heart of things. Sometimes we can't even do that. We just kind of pretend to have relationships. We pretend to have friends. Because we're living in a culture that's designed for disconnection. And it takes more work today than ever before to be in a relationship, to connect with some other people. But realize that it starts with the church. If you're here today and you're a follower of Jesus, you are the light. You're the model for the rest of the world to look at. This is what it looks like. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 27, it says that you're a part of the body of Christ. You each are a part of it. You belong to a body. It goes on to talk about how the analogy is that each of us are a piece of the body. Like we're that connected. That's the analogy the Bible uses, that you're a part of a body. And you can't disconnect pieces of it, and they can't be against each other. It talks about the eye can't want to be an ear, and the hand can't, fight the face. You're going to hit yourself. It works together. It's like a body. And Jesus himself prayed for this. I always say, if Jesus were here, what would he pray? We don't have to ask that question because we already know. It was written down actually in John chapter 17, verse 21. You see Jesus praying. Have you ever read that before? You have Jesus praying for you today, right now. Because he prays for different things, and he prays for his disciples, his closest friends, and then he says, I want to pray for those, God, who are far off, who are going to believe in me someday, way down the road, years and years from now. I want to pray for those people. That's us. If you're a follower of Jesus, he's praying for you. And he has one prayer. He says, I just pray that they be one. God, I just pray that they would be unified, that they be one. Isn't that weird? What do you think Jesus would pray? They'd be pure. They'd be moral. But they'd keep coming to church, please. You know? Maybe that's part of it. You know? If they stop fighting with their spouse, you know? Wish they would stop doing this and that. It's weird. Jesus doesn't pray that stuff. Jesus just says that they be one. If you want to know Jesus' desire for your life today, it's that you would be living in unity with some other followers. That's what we offer small groups for, is because we want you to be able to get together in groups. Okay, so what? A couple takeaways from this morning. Number one, God didn't make us because he was lonely. The question is, then why did he make us? That's a great question. Sure, go search for that. But at least you know he was not lonely when he made us. He had a purpose and a plan, but he did not make you to fulfill his needs. God doesn't need anything. He's completely full, done. He has no needs. He created us, yes. He did not create us because he was lonely. Number two, isolation is where the enemy works. Realize when you're isolated, it is dangerous for you. When you choose isolation, when you choose not to connect, Satan can use that, and he will. He use it against you. Get with people, talk things out, get in community. Okay? Isolation is from the enemy. Number three, you were created to be part of something bigger than yourself. You're created to be part of something bigger than yourself. Think about this. You're pieces of a bigger puzzle that's being built. God's using you in a certain way. He's connecting us all together to do something bigger than we can do alone. Do you want to be bigger? Be part of something that's bigger than yourself, church? I do. I want to be part of something bigger, something that's God-sized. We can only do that when we work together. We've got to be together. And listen, there's this attitude in our culture that we can just do this lone wolf Christianity and we can go it alone. That's fine, because I do believe you have an individual relationship with God, but you will not be able to do something big, God-sized, kingdom-sized impact in the world unless you get together with others. You're created for that. You're created to be part of something bigger than yourself. Number four, lasting connection comes through small groups. That's why we want to get smaller as we get bigger. The reason why we want to get smaller is because we want the connections to last. It's easy to go from church to church to church, and you're part of a church, of many churches, right? But when you're part of a small group, anybody ever been a part of a really good small group before? And there's something else that happens. It's outside the church. You know, it's not about a brand of Move City Church. It's not even about a certain belief system that you're giving into. It's like the people. You get close. You get to know each other, and you work a lot of these things out. There's these things that I say from the stage that you're like, I don't agree with that. That's okay. Work that out in your small group, I guess. Figure that out, you know? Talk about it. It's okay. It's okay. We need to have a place where we can talk that out, though, right? If you come in here and you feel all alone and you feel like I just attacked you or I'm beating up on you, you have no place to go, that's worse. I feel sorry, sad. You know? And I can't care for every single person in the room with all the care that you deserve and that you're made for and that you're worthy of. Please connect with some other people. You can care for each other greater than you even imagine right now. Connect. We want you to get into a small group because it's a lasting connection. You get in a small group with somebody and you're going to be friends way beyond just coming on a Sunday morning. And so I want to kind of close out. I want to move into communion time thinking about this. That if you were to take this picture, this analogy of the Legos, I want you to think about the fact that Jesus is like a piece of the built Lego that came off of that broke off of something that was completely perfect and done. He was part of the fellowship of that, right? He came from that, and it says that he was the cornerstone. So if you can imagine, there's one piece of this Lego that if I took it off, the whole thing would fall apart. That one piece, that's Jesus. And he came off of that to come to all these pieces on the ground. He left what was already built and perfect, and he came down to gather these pieces up. He's coming to gather us up. He's going to say, you're part of something bigger, and I want to connect with you. He left. It was already great and done and built to come down to each one of us so that we can be connected to God in a new way. That's what Jesus wants for you. He wants you to be connected to God. And Jesus went all the way to the point of sacrificing himself, his body, and his blood for us. And that's why we celebrate communion. So let me pray, and then we'll end up passing the communion out.